If you're about to retire, you've got to know this history. Ugh, it's crazy. All right. So I'm just going to read you this. This is going to make sense. I'm going to take two different things and we're going to hit them together, all right, to make sense. So you hang with me. You hang with me. Marie? Josh, sometimes it can be long-winded. Oh, Marie. Anyway, so check this out. So I was arguing with Grok the other day. It says the issue here is how many people who are 65 years old actually live 30 years of retirement. Not just based on life expectancy, but let's look back. So I asked Grok, I said, how many 65-year-olds were there in 1995? And Grok said 3.2 million. How many are still with us today in 2025? That's 30 years. Grok says 1.8 million. I said, so you're telling me, Grok, that of 3.2 million 65 years old in 1995, 1.8 million, or 56%, are still around today? And Grok said, yes. I said, well, that doesn't make any sense, Grok. But anyway, so Grok did all his calculations, and they said, look, man, we had an 80% survival rate from 65 to 75 for 10 years. We had a 50% survival rate from 65 to 85, 20 years. And then we had a 56% survival rate from 65 to 95, 30 years. And I said, huh? You're telling me that 12% of the population didn't survive until they're 85, but they did survive until they're 95. So that means they did like Lazarus, they rose from the dead. Is that what you're saying, Grok? And Grok said, yeah, dude, look, I got all these calculations. I got all these formulas. You can see the formulas we got right there. I don't know if you can see that. Oops, yeah, that formula right there. Yeah, I have all these formulas. I said, Grok, this is freaking stupid, man. And so anyway, so I went back. And I said, explain yourself. And for paragraph upon paragraph, they're trying to explain themselves. And then they say this 56% survival rate to age 95 is consistent with a 17.4 life expectancy in 1995 because of blah, 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 blah. And then I said, well, how can 50% survive only to age of 85 and yet 56% can survive until 95? And then it went on and on until I finally got to agree. Yeah, the 56% survival to age 95 was an overestimate of the exponential model, which assumes a constant mortality rate and doesn't account for the rapid increase in mortality after the age of 85. And so the corrected answer, after many going back and forth, was only 540,000 people who are 65 in 1995 were alive today. All right, 540,000 out of 320. I said, okay, so why is this important? All right, so I want to show you something here. We're going to go back to Portfolio Visualizer, all right, and we're going to show you, compare the Vanguard Value Index Fund to the Vanguard Growth Index Fund. And we're going to go back, I think I went to 2015. Yes, we did. And you can see the compounded annual growth rate of, this is crazy, of the VUG, which is the Growth Index Fund, is 60% higher than the compounded annual growth rate of VTV, which is the Value Index Fund. The Value Index Fund still did stellar, that's 10.11% a year, but the the Growth Index Fund did 16% almost. So $100,000 invested in the Value Index is only worth $279,000 today, which is still stellar, but it's worth almost $500,000 in the Growth Index. Everybody with me on that? So then we take a look and we say, what's the Growth Index consisting of? All right, we come down here and we're going to see a couple things. We're going to come down. This is the mutual fund, not the ETF. It's the same thing, but the ETF goes back, and I just want the mutual fund goes back, but the ETF I think only starts in 2007. So you can see right here, the price to earnings ratio on the Growth Index Fund is 38. And the reason that's there is because they're assuming, well, they're not assuming, but they have earnings growth rate of 31.5%. So they think high growth on earnings equals high PE ratios would make sense. That's what you would think with growth. But I want to show you something here. These are their actual exposures, what they own. 61% is in technology. 61% of the growth index is in technology. Now, in of itself, you might say, well, I don't have that fund. I have VOO. And we're going to look at VOO. VOO. And we're going to say, all right, let's take a look at VOO. VOO is a combination of the growth index and the value index. All right, so VOO combines them both. So, and then we say VOO, how much of that S&P 500 is in information technology or technology as a whole. We're going to come down here and we're going to show you right there. 33% is in information technology. Interesting. So I said to Grok, what was the Nifty 50? All right, so the Nifty 50, what percentage of the S&P 500 was in the Nifty 50 at its peak? And its peak was in late 1972. It had about 30% of the S&P 500 was in the Nifty 50 stocks and had a PE ratio about 42 to 50. And I just showed you what the PE ratio's VUG was, which was about 38.5. The PE ratio of the S&P 500, a lot lower, is 27.7. So it's not nearly as high as what the 50 right here. Trading at average price to earnings ratio, the Nifty 50 was 42, whereas the S&P 500 as a whole was 19. All right, so significantly higher. So then we say, okay, but we still see 30% of the S&P 500 was in the Nifty 50. 33% right now of the S&P 500 is in technology stocks. Technology stocks are trading at a significant premium in terms of price earnings ratio relative to the S&P 500 as a whole. And in fact, if you just look at the growth side of it, 61% of the S&P 500, that is the growth side, is in technology stocks with a high PE ratio. All right, so then I said to Grok, I said, all right, what percentage of tech stocks were in the S&P 500 in 1999? And around 30% again, 30% again. And the same thing, high PE ratios based on high earnings projections. All right, and then what happened in 1973? Well, we know what happened in 1973. The stocks got killed. The S&P 500 got killed because the Nifty 50 got killed. In fact, we see from right here, Jeremy Siegel's book, Stocks in the Long Run, he says, the collapse of the large growth stocks known as the Nifty 50. All right, that's what he talks about. One of the reasons the small caps did so well in the latter part of the 1970s is because no one wanted to touch the large growth stocks in the Nifty 50. What happened in the S&P 500 in 2000, 2001, and 2? The collapse of the tech stocks. All right, so what happened is the earnings didn't matriculate the way my wife says I'm not using the word matriculate correctly because, we want to matriculate the ball downfield. My wife says it's not matriculate. I'm not sure that's true, though. Is it when they didn't matriculate? Yeah, right? Didn't it show up or didn't come to fruition? Whatever it is. But anyway, the earnings of which these high PE ratios were built underperformed. Now, why did I say all this relative to Grok? Because Grok screwed that up royally. And Grok, ChatGPT, which I don't use that much, I'm starting to, and Claude, which I use a lot, I know for a fact Grok has had many, many errors on AI. I know for a fact Claude AI has had many, many errors on AI as well. My brother says ChatGPT as well. So the issue is, why are these growth stocks trending so heavily in terms of price earnings ratios and all that? Because everyone thinks the earnings are going to be through the roof to justify the nosebleed. It's not nosebleed, but the high PE ratios. What happens when it's proven that AI is going to solve all the world's problems? Kind of like the human genome stuff. All right. Everyone said back in the day, human genome is going to take over. We're all going to be living to 120. It's just not true. Now, could it be? Sure. But if you invested all your hard-earned money in human genome projects, you're in a world of hurt now. You just are. Because it's based on EVs, electric vehicles. Everyone says the EVs could take over. And if you would have invested in Edison in his first EV project, you're bankrupt. But even then, if you invest in EVs, they're not taking over the world. They're just not. They're not. People get mad when I say inefficient. They're inefficient relative to modern use. They're efficient engines, but they're not efficient in terms of you being able to drive on a regular basis. People get so, I was like, dude, come on. You see what I'm saying? I'm not saying the engine is inefficient because it's not. We all know this. It's inefficient for day-to-day travel in suburbia in particular. That's just a fact. All right, so EVs never came to fruition like they promised. Absolutely. Battery power. We're going to fund our grid just based on capturing the electricity from this energy from the sun and turning it to electricity to store in batteries. That's called photovoltaic. It's not happening, dude. It's just not. And I was just reading something the other day where some idiot said, I forgot who it was. Was it, might have even been AI. They say 92% of all capacity now, new capacity, it wasn't AI. Some guy posted, I couldn't believe it. He said 92% of all new electricity capacity is from renewable sources in the United States. I said, this is insanity. First of all, I never heard of nameplate capacity. Something you just don't always talk about. I said, this is crazy. He might have got that from AI. I don't know. That's nuts. Anyway, the point being is once the bubble bursts, because people say these earnings projections are based on falsities that this AI revolution is going to change the world. Now, I love AI. I use it, but I use it with a grain of salt because I know they screw up like this right here. And I had to argue with Grok for freaking paragraphs upon paragraphs. I said, Grok, what the hell? What are you talking about? And finally, it got through his stupid head. Oh, I get it. So if AI is supposed to solve the world, how are they that stupid right here? AI is a tool. That's it. It's like any tool. It can be used for bad or good, like a firearm, without question, like a knife, like a pan. It's just a tool, man, like a flashlight. But the idea that these earnings are based on AI changing the world, which I think it is, and when that doesn't happen, doesn't come to fruition, what do you think is going to happen with the stocks? Just like the Nifty 50, just like the freaking great tech bubble in 2000, the stock's going to fall. Now, should you get out of the S&P 500? Of course not. But you should certainly have a bunch of cash to weather the storm when this happens. This is a history we got to understand. Nifty 50, S&P 500, or the tech bubble, and potentially now as well. Now, I absolutely could be wrong. That's why I don't say get out of the stocks. But man, you've got to know, especially right when you're getting ready to retire, that we need some cash to alleviate the blow that, in my opinion, is certain to come. Absolutely. Now, if you're still young, just if you're plugging money in, I plug money in every month. Keep doing what you're doing. You don't need the money. But if you're about to retire, you do. God bless. Smash that like button. Love your thoughts. We'll see you.